Ah, here we go again.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Two planets, two races, the Mok'Nathal and the Broken Draenei. They've got a lot more in common than one would originally think. They're both outsiders to their own race and people, heavily different from their usual cultures, and are two of the most prominent races on their own planets of Argus and what is now known as Outland for the time being. Obviously, if you've been on my channel for a long time, these have been the two most races I've been asking for. And before, it was just the typical, I would like this, but now we've got more to work with for what could possibly be new customization for the two races, or two new playable races in general. Of the two, they actually have quite a decent amount of lore, and a rather good population for their race, which is always good for these types of things. I'll try to keep it brief, but the Broken Draenei, or the Kra'Kul, were once regular Draenei, but were cursed by the Fel to ultimately twist them into hulking shells of their former selves, losing their connection to the light for the most part and seeking out either the shadows or the elements to substitute said connection. The Kra'Kul are prominent on two different planets right now. The broken world of Draenor, now known as Outland. Currently, they are led by Akama, who staged the retaking of their planet against the likes of Illidan and the Burning Legion, after their world was torn asunder by the Orcs. Akama had been left behind on this desolate world of Outland and made it his own duty to preserve their home. And then Akama has been hard at work at restoring the Black Temple into the Temple of Karabor as it once was. But whether or not that has been successful is hard to say. Meanwhile, in the Draenei's homeworld of Argus, there are the resistant force of the Kra'Kul present there, led by Chieftain Hatun, whom chose to stay behind on Argus to buy his people more time to escape. He and several others managed to survive by communing with the shadows and the earth surrounding their planet. They are one of the main resistant forces against the Legion, but are barely surviving as is on Argus. Now, several years later, the Legion has long since been defeated, but are still operating bit by bit on Argus, and we now know that the Kra'Kul of the planet chose to stay and fight, dealing with these burning remnants, as I'll call them. Hatun even invites Velen back over to the planet of Argus, where a Minari seeks to prove his allegiance against the Burning Crusade, which he does, and this allows them back into the Draenei society. All of the Minari are basically coming back to Azeroth, and are coming back into the Alliance and into the Draenei, and so on and so forth. But with that, there is also a conversation between the resistant Hatun and the Prophet Velen off-screen. They seem to have had talks like these before. My own interpretation of this is that, just like the Minari are being accepted back into the fold, the Kra'Kul are also being invited back into the Alliance and into the Draenei society. Probably more so than the Minari, as they were the resistant force to the Legion and they suffered for it. Notably, the Broken are already technically a part of the Alliance or the Draenei, but the Kra'Kul on Argus are not really, and have been stubborn to leave their world behind. But with the Legion's downfall, and Argus still suffering from the Legion's torment towards it, it is very likely, and very probable, that the Broken there will find a new home on Azeroth like the rest of their people. And a similar thing might be going on with Akama, as Outland, while is in a better position than Argus is still dying too, and it'd be for the benefit of all of the Draenei and all of the Broken to finalize their home together on Azeroth. Thus meaning we get to my point where I do believe the Broken will be available to us in some shape or form. Circling back to the Mok'Nathal, they are a clan of half-ogres and half-orcs, one of the largest known populations of a race conjoined together. Born in the snowy region of Frostfire Ridge, they were meant to be super soldiers of sorts to the ogres, but broke free thanks to the efforts of the neighboring clans, and chose to live a life of isolation far from the rest of the orcs and the horde, believing that they would never be accepted by their people. While a few of them would still end up in the horde, most notably Rexxar, whom would be outcasted for this choice, the majority of them would choose to stay behind in the desolate and broken world of Draenei that had been reduced to a very shattered and forever changed world, refusing to join the conquest of Azeroth. Led by their chieftain Leorox, they lived in a life mostly of pacifism and isolation for the most part, namely dealing with ogres, Gron, and apparently the Draenei when it came to conflict. They are tuned to the wilds and thrive off of the land with their beasts. Notably, they are not a part of the Horde, but they are willing to accept their help and offer them aid, and vice versa. Recently, the Orcish Horde invited the Mok'Nathal to the first Kosh'Harg on Azeroth by Thrall. Some of the Mok'Nathal actually participated in this. Surprised that they were even invited or included in the first place, considering how the orcs had typically viewed them for their blood back in the day. Now, Leorox noted that the Horde had indeed changed from the one that he saw when Blackhand led it. This is where father and son, Leorox and Rexxar, finally were able to speak to one another after the years of being apart. As the time that they had spoken, it was not on the best of terms, and Rexxar chose the Horde over his clan. Interesting to note that several of the clans on Outland are far more open and are far more pushing to leave their homeworld behind in favor of the new one, in favor of Azeroth, as Outland has been quite in a horde state for some time now, falling apart in the Twisting Nether itself. In fact, almost all of the orcs are doing this now. Almost all of them are leaving their world behind. While the Mok'Nathal do not state if they're leaving it or not, it does seem very likely with the Black Dragons, Nether Dragons, Orcish clans, and potentially even the Draenei like I've said, it's likely that the Mok'Nathal too will join in on Azeroth with the rest. And potentially they'll join this horde that is far more accepting of them in this day and age, maybe even offering the orcs their own teachings along the way. So yes, it would seem the chances are quite likely for both of these races to join the ranks of the Alliance or the Horde. They've got a decent population, their own cultures, unique aesthetics, even if they aren't exactly playable, either in customization or an allied race, which I do hope they are, truly. It seems quite clear they're at least setting up for them to leave their worlds behind and join the Horde and the Alliance in some way. They have a decent setup of leaders, characters, and a variety of classes that they could and would make sense to be available for each of them. Notably, both of these races have such a connection to nature that it could lead to them even being druids, which could be a great way to segue them as teachers for their races. You can start them on Outland and Argus, you can set them up with a new leadership role for the Mok'Nathal through Rexxar being passed the torch by his father Leorox. You can have the broken Draenei of Outland and Argus form their own strong bond through Hatun and Akama even. You can do so much with this idea alone, and I feel like I could ramble on this front forever. But those are my thoughts on the potentiality increasing more and more each day to the idea of playable Broken and playable Mok'Nathal. The story seems to be heading in that direction, and just look at these glorious two races. They're already unique and cool enough to be their own thing, I think. But what are your thoughts? Do you think we're approaching an announcement for these two soon? Or do you think this is something far less extreme? Let me know your thoughts down below. But here's hoping we get these two. They are just some of my favorites. Go ahead and leave a comment, like, subscribe, and all that jazz. Follow us on the Discord where we talk about all sorts of stuff and things. We'd love to have you. And if you like me enough, you can support me on my Patreon, like these amazing folks here. helps to make these kinds of videos happen. But until next time, my friends, see ya!